Hello, lovely people. I know I didn't make a video last week, and I'm really gonna try to get my shit together and start posting videos regularly, but since last week's topic was transphobia and this week's topic is non-binary erasure, I figured that those topics pretty well go hand in hand, and so I'll be discussing both in this video. So, transphobia. Transphobia is commonly defined as dislike, prejudice, antagonism, or violence towards a trans person because of their gender, and it can take many forms from microaggressions to full-out assault or murder. So let's dissect transphobia a little bit. Transphobia is comprised of three main types of discrimination: transmisogyny, cissexism, and erasure. Now, before you go, whoa, Lane, that's a lot of new information and big words I've never heard before, I'm gonna break it down for you. Starting with transmisogyny. The definition of misogyny is dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. Transmisogyny is a special and particularly horrific brand of misogyny directed specifically at transgender women. Within the trans community, trans women are by far the most disprivileged group, because they face discrimination for being transgender in conjunction with being women. Trans women have slurs specifically invented to degrade them, and much of the transphobia that trans people who are not women face stems from misdirected transmisogyny or association with trans women. Anytime a trans woman is thrown in as a scare trope in a television show, or they use the man in a dress archetype, any comment about how much a trans woman passes or does not pass for a real woman, any comments or ideologies that objectify trans women's bodies or question the validity of their womanhood, these are all forms of transmisogyny. Trans women are real women and must be treated with all of the respect you should afford to every woman. Period. Moving on to cissexism. Sexism is defined as prejudice or discrimination based on sex, or behaviors, conditions, or attitudes that foster stereotypes of social roles based on sex. So, as you can guess, cissexism is a form of sexism specifically experienced by trans people. Anything that associates personality characteristics or behaviors with physical sex is a form of sexism. And so, cissexism is the idea of associating gender identity with physical sex. And it can take many forms. Calling vaginas girl parts and penises boy parts are forms of cissexism, as well as labeling menstrual products feminine hygiene products. Not everyone who has a vagina is a girl, not everyone who has a penis is a boy, and not everyone who experiences menstruation appreciates having their bodily functions associated with femininity. These are all seemingly innocuous things, and are generally the things that make cis people throw up their hands and say, "These trans people demand too much. What will I do if I cannot prescribe gender to other people's genitalia?" But the fact is that these are still cissexist microaggressions that contribute to larger, more violent forms of cissexism. Saying that a trans person was born a boy or born a girl and became whatever they identify as is cissexist. Making the assumption that because a person is transgender, they must want to fully transition to the closest equivalent to a cisgender body they can possibly attain is cissexist. Forcing trans people to have invasive genital reassignment surgery, which they may or may not want in order for them to change their sex marker, is extremely cissexist. In general, any ideas that someone must be a certain gender because of their assigned sex, or that if they are transgender, they must just be basically a cisgender person trapped in the wrong cisgender body, are both extremely cissexist ways of thinking and can foster xenophobia, violence, as well as misunderstanding of trans identities and priorities. And now we come to erasure. If you don't know what erasure means, it's defined as the act or instance of erasing something, or the removal of all traces of something, obliteration. Basically acting like something doesn't exist or hasn't existed, or removing it from public consciousness. Trans erasure is something faced by all aspects of the trans community, since until very recently, trans people had no accurate or positive representation in mainstream media and were never even mentioned except as the occasional offensive punchline. The landscape is slowly shifting, but this is still a major issue in our community. Often there is this idea that because we are only 1% of the population, we are too small of a demographic to bother talking about. But absence from media both demonstrates and reinforces absence from public consciousness, and that mindset is what prevents us from achieving accurate representation. Our misrepresentation and lack of representation in media enforces the xenophobia that results in transphobic violence and discrimination. Out of the trans community, I feel like it's safe to say that non-binary people experience the most erasure. This is because non-binary erasure is present in both the cisgender community and, to a lesser extent, the transgender community as well. Even though non-binary people make up between 10 and 30% of the trans community, many transgender community programs are still exclusive to non-binary people. making programs specifically for trans men and trans women, but not for non-binary or genderqueer people. We're often added on as a footnote or arguing point within the community while receiving no actual support or representation. And as far as media representation, well, what media representation? Other than one minor genderqueer character on House of Lies, I have come across zero representation for non-binary genders in mainstream television or film. And it's not that I haven't been looking. I've been desperately looking. And I don't count characters of unspecified sex as representation. Aliens and robots are not people, and they're certainly not representative of non-binary transgender people. I don't remember where I heard this, but at some point someone told me, in order to affect a culture, you must first affect the media. Responsible and accurate representation of transgender and non-binary people is not just important, but it is critical in manifesting the social change necessary to make sure that trans and non-binary people are safe and respected within our society. That's why I put myself out here in these videos, and that's why I'm pursuing a career in media. And if anyone else has the power to put themselves out there or create more inclusive media, I urge you to do so, because as a community, we deserve to see examples of ourselves as we are and as we can be, and the rest of the world deserves to see us too. Well, that's all I have to say, and I'll see you next week. Peace out.